morning and welcome to this video on the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the era of weak presidents. So today we're going to look at the end of Reconstruction. We're going to put the final nail in its coffin. We're going to look at the election of 1876 and the compromise of 1877, and we're going to look at the era of weak presidency starting with Rutherford Hayes. So coming on to Reconstruction, we're going to quickly go over it again. So we've got presidential Reconstruction from May 1865 to December 1865. This is where Andrew Johnson forcibly tries to bring about reconstruction of the South, bring in those governments back into the Union. It led to 13,000 pardons, but it obviously did not go far enough. Congress did not think that it was a good plan and rejected it outright. And it led to a period called Congressional Reconstruction from December 1865 to November 1868. That's where Congress passes the 14th Amendment. Despite the vetoes of Andrew Johnson, it forced through, as well as the Civil Rights Bill and the Freedmen's Bureau reinforcement. The Freedmen's Bureau was an attempt to forcibly bring about the southern states to recognise African Americans' rights to vote. And again, it fails and leads to a period that we now call Radical Reconstruction from February 1869 to March 1876. Andrew Johnson is not re-elected. It goes to Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant comes to power after Andrew Johnson's nearly impeached. It ruins all of Andrew Johnson's political capital when he can't fight another election. So the war hero Grant comes in. In this period we also have the passing of the 15th Amendment and the Enforcement Acts that came after. And lastly, the Civil Rights Act. This is when Congress, with Grant, tried to force the South through the use of military occupation to be part of the Union. And so we've got the southern states divided into 5 military zones of occupation, and the federal troops are there to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendment with the Enforcement Acts. So why does Reconstruction fail in this period? We have many different examples, from the political corruption that plagued Ulysses Grant and meant that he could not seek a third election in 1876, including the Tweed Ring and other scandals. In 1873 we've got the Depression, so we've got an economic plight that greatly affected the South and led to large amounts of opposition forming to the Republican Party in the South. And we've got in the middle, top middle, we have the Battle of Liberty Place, one example of the type of violence and outbreak that existed against the occupation of the South by the Republicans. We got a huge growth of white terror groups such as the KKK and other white supremacists. They are attacking the civil liberties of the African Americans, and we've got a growth in a democratic niche called the Redeeming Party, or the Redeemers, sorry. They wanted redemption of the South. They believed that the military occupation had categorically attacked the South's right to self-govern, and they wanted redemption. They wanted to kick the federal troops out and they wanted to govern themselves, and it gained huge amounts of support because of the political corruption, because of the economic suffering, and because of white supremacist groups. And so by 1876 all but 3 of the states had been redeemed, had redemption governments. And it leads to the 1876 election. As I've said, we have Ulysses S. Grant. He is unable to seek another election. He wanted to go for the third, but because of the political corruption, he was not able to. And so the Republican Party choose another candidate. They choose Rutherford B. Hayes. And this election is going to be close. It's going to go down to the wire. In fact, both parties are going to say that they have won. The Democrats choose Samuel Tilden to become their leader, and he fights against Rutherford Hayes in the election of 1876. It's so close, Congress have to wade in and decide the outcome, and it leads to the Compromise of 1877. Rutherford Hayes was a moderate Republican. He was the governor of Ohio. He believed in compromise and reconciliation. That's why he appealed to the Republican Party, and it's why he appealed to some of the Southerners as well. He believed in home rule, that the South should govern itself. It should not be down to the federal troops. And then we've got Samuel Tilden. And actually, if you look at it, there's very little that that separates these two candidates. Samuel Tilden is a moderate Democrat. He's the former governor of New York. He rose to prominence by trying to curb the corruption of Grant's scandals. He was somebody that appealed to the Democratic Party, but he wasn't enough to win the election, and it resulted in such a close call. So we've got Tilden here winning 184 of the seats, but 4.3 million votes. And we've got Rutherford Hayes, who wins 185 of the Electoral College and just 4,036,000 votes. And you're probably wondering, well, why does Hayes win? Well, in an American election, the amount of Electoral College votes wins. So Hayes has 185 to Tilden's 184, even though Tilden wins outright the the number of popular votes. He does not have enough electoral colleges to become the President of the United States. But both parties claim victory of the southern states, and it's down to electoral fraud. They both say that this has gone on, and so it leads to Congress needing to come in and make a decision. They both claimed massive amounts of electoral fraud. The Democrats claimed Tilden won South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, and obviously the Republicans do not agree with this. They say that Hayes has won as the votes have been counted. It led to the Compromise of 1877. Congress convened a commission very quickly. They wanted to determine the outcome of the election quickly. It's made up of 15 members, the 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats and 1 independent. The independent resigns from the commission and is replaced by a Republican, and therefore they award the presidency to Rutherford Hayes by 8 votes to 7. The compromise comes afterwards. Hayes realises his position is fraught with danger. He could not govern if he did not compromise with the Democrats, and so the compromise is the removal of all federal troops in the south, federal aid to the south, the start of railroad works again and public works for the south, and the redemption of the south. So putting all of those together, it ends the period of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. How can the 14th and the 15th Amendments be enforced with force if they've had to remove all the federal troops from the south? How can the reconstruction of the South occur? How can African Americans' rights be maintained if there aren't the federal troops in there doing the work for them? So that's it. That's the end of Reconstruction. And it leads to a period of weak presidents, and we start the weak presidency with Rutherford Hayes. Rutherford promises that he will only seek one election. He will not be re-elected in the next election in 1880. He sticks to that, but it does make him incredibly weak, a lame duck. What is the political system at this time? We've still got the Republicans, we've still got the Democrats. In reality, they are both very mixed. They are both quite diverse. But on the whole of it, on the face of it, the Republicans are the party of the Union. They favour big business, high tariffs, the values of native-born Americans, whereas the Democrats believe in states' rights, the state right to govern themselves, and that includes the southern states. They believe in white supremacy in the South. They believe in the limited role of the federal government and low tariffs. We'll come on to tariffs a bit later when we look at the economy in the South and when we start to talk about the Gilded Age. President Hayes was limited to one term in office. He had a narrow victory and he therefore could not do very much, and he's often called a lame duck presidency, which means he doesn't have very much political goodwill. He can't make promises about what will happen in his second term because they know he won't be seeking a re-election, and that really does weaken his position as presidency, and it leads to the solid South emerging. The Southern South is the dominance of the Democratic Party over both state and federal elections, and it really lasts until the 1960s. You can see just how solid the South was. Because of Hayes, the Redeemers deconstructed the reformist legislation. They were able to undermine the 14th and 15th Amendments, not legally. Legally they are still there, but they are not enforced. They're not, the principles of the 14th and 15th Amendments aren't kept. And so Hayes can be called a weak president. He is unable to do very much. The only things he does do, he keeps his promise, and that means he's restored some respectability to the presidency. Ulysses S. Grant and the corruption that had plagued his presidency really did affect people's views of it. And Hayes must be given some credit for his attempts to end the spoils system and patronage. Now, patronage was the practice of rewarding loyal supporters with public positions, and obviously that ties in with corruption of how people view the presidency and view patronage. They think that it is dishonest. They think that it is taking their money for granted and that there's so much corruption. But he was heavily opposed by a group of Republicans called the Stalwarts. They were ambitious Republicans who wanted to stop what Hayes was doing, and they heavily influence our next election when Hayes does not seek re-election in 1880. We'll be looking at that in the next lesson. So far, just to recap, we've looked at the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the era of weak presidencies, starting with the relatively weak presidency of Hayes. We've only got one real clear example of him trying to bring about good change, and we've got many examples of him failing to do so and being very weak in his ability to change America at this time. Thank you.